Welcome to the Comix Asylum podcast, where we explore the world of comic books, movies, television, and pop culture in general. My name is Steve Bino, and this week, Fearless Fred stops by to talk about his Star Wars radio play, Mud 79. I'm pleased to welcome to the Asylum, Toronto icon, comic book scribe, radio host, rock and roll maven, Fearless Fred, Fred Kennedy to the Asylum. Welcome.
Thank you very much. I'm very glad to be here. Thank you for wanting to talk about Mud 79. I'm stoked.
Absolutely. So let's kick it off with Mud 79. For Star Wars fans out there, what exactly is this?
Mud 79 is sort of like Platoon meets Star Wars. It's a story that is told from the Imperial perspective and takes place 3 years after the end of the Clone Wars. And I picked that time specifically because you're going to have an entire generation of kids that grew up watching HoloNet programming and propaganda and news and programs all about the Clone Wars and all about the greatness of the Republic. And they're going to grow up thinking that the Republic is amazing and the Republic is great, and then they're going to want to be part of it because that's the way propaganda always works. And the beginning of the idea came from the Ken Burns Vietnam documentary series, which is amazing, by the way. And there was this one guy, and he goes, I grew up during the Second World War. My father fought in the war. My uncles fought in Korea. It was my time. I felt obligated to go because he grew up surrounded by this culture. And when you look at Star Wars, that's what's going to happen. You're going to have an entire generation that's grown up during the Clone Wars that's been influenced by this propaganda, and they're going to want to be part of it. And they're not going to disassociate the Republic from the Empire. It's going to be the same entity for them at that point, you know?
No, totally. And I'm glad that you mentioned Ken Burns' doc. I have to admit, I was transfixed watching that. And not to go too off course a little bit, but being a Montreal Canadiens fan, one of the writers for the Gazette was in it, and he was Michael Farber, and sorry, not Michael Farber, Jack Todd, and he actually left the States to come up here, so he was AWOL, but his brother fought, and it just struck me the human cost and the decisions that people have to make when they're caught in a system that is basically, determining their life choices.
Yeah, and I really feel those elements are things that Star Wars doesn't explore enough. I think the Clone Wars, the series, did more work in exploring that aspect of the Star Wars universe than anything else. And that's a kid's show. And the Clone Wars actually served as a fantastic bit of inspiration for Mud 79 and the things that weren't front and center in the Clone Wars, but were there. Like there's some really interesting stuff, like where there's the one clone who he turns against his own because he said, you didn't give us a choice in this.
Right.
We're robots. We're slaves to you, to the Republic. Right. We don't have the choice. And they look at him like he's the worst, but watching it from the outside, I'm like, he's not wrong. He's not wrong what he's saying. He's not wrong.
Now, it's amazing when you're not drinking the Kool-Aid, how different the world looks.
Totally. Absolutely. And I also, when you're talking about drinking the Kool-Aid, I feel like we watch Star Wars from this perspective with everybody in the Empire is evil. Everybody in the rebellion is the greatest person ever. And when you look at the scale and size of the Empire itself, like at the end of the Battle of Endor, after the Emperor is killed and the second Death Star is blown up, there's still 37,000 Imperial-class Star Destroyers out there. Yeah. That is an indication of the scale of the Empire. So to say that everybody involved is the worst is just, to me, a very inaccurate statement. I look at the Empire as like multiple fiefdoms underneath the banner of the Empire, and all of them should be treated unique.
Yes.
And you take a look at our main character in the very beginning. At the very beginning of Mud, he introduces himself saying, I joined the Empire. And then he explains, like, within 2 paragraphs, like, this is why, like, if we didn't fight for the Republic, we would have been like massacred by the Trade Federation. So fighting for the Republic was the way to go. And when it became the Empire, they were already doing the same thing for us as the Republic was. So why not? And and there was also that one part in Mandalorian when judged by any metric, healthcare, education, prosperity. And I'm like, you say it, Mr. Herzog. Break it down. I want to see some stats. Give me the stat sheet. Like, there's some really interesting questions that get raised. Is the Empire the same to everybody? Is the Empire the same everywhere? And those are things I really wanted to address with Mud 79.
No, and it's interesting too how layered Mud 79 is, because you've got a multitude of characters and they all have their own reasons for doing what they do, joining Mud and the Empire, but they're not necessarily on the Emperor's level of, I want total domination and wiping out the Jedi. They just want to survive and make sure they can provide for their family.
That's, again, going back to Ken Burns, is the big common trait with like every single person that was there is they came from poor families, you know?
Right.
Not everybody comes from this wealthy planet in the core worlds. Some people are just poor and they have no other options. Like the main character breaks down, I've got no real options. So what was I gonna, this was my ticket out of here. So I took it because that's what I had. And you learn about other characters in his unit that were dealing with the exact same thing. They just wanted an escape. They wanted to get somewhere. They wanted to see the galaxy, you know? So they joined up, and that's a real common trait. And I will say, for anybody who's watching being like, yeah, but the Empire does bad things, and things will change. Characters' eyes will start to open as the story moves along, you know?
And part of what the characters are going through too is a bit of naivete, because they're joining as young people. And so they're idealists, or they're just looking to survive. And then when they start to see certain things that happen in either on the battlefield or within the ranks of their unit, they start to question things. And that's kind of what coming of age and becoming an adult's all about.
There's even some parts in the story, and I've had discussions about this with my producer, where the character is lying to himself in the story. And if you're listening to it carefully, you'll hear him do it.
Yeah.
And I did those things intentionally because we all end up lying to ourselves to make ourselves the hero of our story. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
And it's not that he's outright lying. He's changing certain details to make himself look like less of a bad guy. Is what he's doing.
Right.
And he's learning as he goes. And as the story progresses, you start to see him change as a character. And we've only got the first 6 episodes out now, and the next 6 start dropping on the 27th. So that's where you're really going to see the changes start to happen. The next 6 episodes are awesome. I just wrapped up episode 8 last night with the production side, and magnifique. I'm really excited about it because I'm doing things with Star Wars that I've always wanted to see done, and I don't think I'll ever get to see them on the screen, but you'll really start to see them happening.
Well, I'm really enjoying listening to them. I'm almost finished the 6th episode, and now that you've brought up the fact that we have an unreliable narrator, right?
Yeah.
It makes you question every character he has encountered and described up until now. And so I can only imagine what kind of reveals we're going to have moving forward in the upcoming chapters.
Yeah, there's actually a scene in the 7th episode where you feel him come to grips with what's going on around him. And then 5 minutes later, he's like, no, it's okay. It's all right. Don't worry about it. You know what I mean? Because he doesn't want to believe that he's part and parcel of horrible things that are happening. And not just him, but the people that are around him. He doesn't want to think less of them either, you know? And I think that's just something we do as we're young. And then as we get older, we become a lot more cynical about things and brutally honest about the world. So
Yeah, you tend to filter the people around you a little bit. You know,
yeah,
friendships are pretty
absolutely.
big when you're young, and then they get to be pretty small the older you get.
Yes, they do. You have a smaller crew of much closer friends is what ends up happening.
Yeah, yeah, for sure, for sure. So, how did you come up with the world? What did you use as, like, I know you're talking about Ken Burns and then the Star Wars universe as a whole, but how did you put all the Lego pieces together to get where we are now?
Um, I had the idea of so it all started with this one, and I'm pretty sure everybody's seen this picture. There's this one painting, it's by a Spanish artist, and it's of a scout trooper, and he's leaning against a tree. I'm sorry, I got a bit of a cold here, so everyone has
It's
to
all
bear
good.
with me.
It's all good.
So he's leaning against a tree, and it's raining, and his armor is really muddy, and he's got his rifle, and he's holding like a pair of binoculars, and he's just kind of like he's got this defeated look on his face. And I always built like this story around that guy about how, what would it be like after the empire is imploding upon itself? Like once the emperor dead, I guarantee that a whole bunch of factions within the empire flipped sides. You know, they flipped because it was convenient to survive that way. So that's what they decided to do. And I just imagine what it's like being on this one planet knowing it's over, knowing you're going to lose, and having to watch the galaxy fold up on you, but your orders are hold this planet to the last man. Like that's what you're going to do. And that's when I started having this story about this one lone unit on a planet in the middle of nowhere fighting to the last man, knowing they're going to lose from an imperial perspective. And I tried to rationale the story, and I read a book, it's by a German guy called Blood Red Snow, and it's a German infantry officer, not officer, German infantryman's perspective of the Eastern Front as the Eastern Front collapses and the Russians are coming in. And that is when I had a big switch in my head where I stopped thinking of the empire as the Third Reich. I started to think about them as the Red Army, and I've read a few books about the Red Army, and I will double down on my perspective about that, just in the way that the Red Army used tactics. Like, we got lots of men, just keep throwing them. That's what the Empire does. Like, that's the exact same thing. So I kind of had a switch there, and that was that they kind of sat on the back burner. And then I watched Rogue One, and then that was when it really came out that like, you can make the rebels just as brutal and vicious as you can make the Empire. And then when I saw Solo and the Mud Troopers, guys that are beneath the Stormtroopers, I'm like, that's it. That's what I needed. And Solo, the Battle of Mimban, which was the extension of a battle from the Clone Wars, was really the big impetus, because I started to realize that just because the Clone Wars ended doesn't mean that the war was done. Because look at Iraq, the Second Gulf War, Desert Storm 2. The war lasted like 2 or 3 months, but the violence is still going on right now. And that is what happened, to me, in my opinion, that is what happened on thousands of worlds in the Empire. And they show it in Solo. Like, that's what's going on. It was a war. It was a battle on a planet that was mop up from the Clone Wars. And so that is what's going on this planet Cestin 4. Like, the war's done, but the fighting's not over. And so there's this one YouTube channel called Generation Tech. And these guys, like, you think I know Star Wars? I've watched hours of their videos and taking notes about the way the galaxy works in Star Wars. And they explain like how the Mud Trooper is the Imperial Army. That's it. That's like the basic. They go in, they hold planets, they clean up, they fortify. The Stormtroopers are the face of the Empire. They're the best of the best. And in the beginning of the story, he talks about how he was a really good shot and he could have made it as a Stormtrooper, but you don't want to be a Stormtrooper because you're going to die. Like, that's what happens. And so he didn't want to do it. He's like, I don't want to go die. Like, what's the point of being the face of the Empire if you're dead? So he didn't want to be a stormtrooper. So being a mud trooper, though less glamorous, was a much better opportunity to survive your term of service. So that's what he decided to do. So he's on this planet, System 4, where they've got a population that is in flux because a lot of the people that were in power there suddenly are no longer in power because they were really friendly with the Republic and they expressed loyalist tendencies. And so there's now a new group of people in charge. They're the Empire. And even though the majority of the people on this planet are much happier with this new system because there's not as much slave trading, etc., as there was under the Republic, they're not happy. So they start fighting. And that's where the story really gets going. And when I really started to analyze the Star Wars universe with the stuff from Generation Tech, I'm telling you, these guys, it's shocking how much research these guys have done. That was when all the pieces really just started cascading. And that's when I started writing it all out. And that was like the notes came. I took some notes around the fall of last year, and I talked to my producer of my podcast saying, I want to do this as like a radio play. And she goes, I don't think you understand how much work this is, because I didn't. And then when I was like, yeah, you're probably right. And so then we had a trip. We did the family trip to Disney, the first time I've ever gone. And we went and we had like a bunch of our friends, and we went to Galaxy's Edge. And when we were we went to Galaxy's Edge, and I was sitting there with one of my buddies from high school, and he's there with his kids. And then I just started talking about it, the idea, and how I was worried about it being too much work. And the thing about Disney they don't tell you is you can drink in the day. So we're drinking like at lunch, and we're a little bit tipsy in Star Wars land. And he's like, you got to do it. And I'm like, I got to do it. So that was when I decided that I was going to do it in like February. And since then, it's been a very slow, laborious process.
Now, it's a radio play. Not everyone may not know that. So what goes into making a radio play? Because as I'm listening to it, and you'd mentioned Platoon, I thought I was listening to a war serial.
Yeah.
That might have been done in like the 50s or 40s.
That was the idea.
But with just the cover of Star Wars on it. So what goes into making that? And you've got cast members and then music, sound effects. What kind of a task have you put yourself into?
A bigger one than I expected. And what's interesting too is like we talked when we were emailing back and forth. If you listen to the first episode, it's very layered. There's a lot of effects and all that, and they're percolating throughout the whole thing. But once you get to the third episode and then the fourth episode, by the time you're getting to the fifth and sixth, like it's thick. Like, and that's because I'm learning. I used to be a producer on radio. That was one of my big breaks in radio, came from my production ability and making commercials. And so I'm relearning things that I used to do all the time. And so doing the radio play, like you've got so what I do is I record everything. I record me doing the narrator's lines because I'm the narrator. And then I record all the dialogue for all the other characters. And then I send them the audio of their lines, and then they get their lines and they send them back to me. And then I go back and then I hand bomb their dialogue into the audio file. And then I start building the play where I've got the main audio track of the narration. And then where it's needed, I add certain effects. Like whenever anybody's on the comms channel, there's like an effect that you have to run to make it sound like it's running through radio. When you've got the Inquisitor or the Purge troopers talking, you run a specific effect to make it sound like they're talking through the mask, like that classic Star Wars way of having a line through the mask. And then you run the sound effects and then the atmospheric effects, like the ambiance stuff. So if they're in a swamp, there's like sound effects like it's a swamp. And if they're in a field, there's some field sound effects like wind blowing through, if it's raining, rain, all that stuff. And then you add the music, and the music is something that I had very heated discussions with I didn't want music. Initially I was dead set against having any music in it. I wanted it to sound real, just like you're tuning in and you're just listening, you know. And she said that I was thinking of it from an audiobook perspective, which I was. She was totally right when she said that. I chirp my producer on the podcast constantly. If anybody listens, I call her a contemptible harpy all the time.
Every episode.
Everyone. But I value her opinion so much because 90% of the time I end up agreeing with her because she's right. And so she just sent it to like the network's producer, and she had him add in some music, just like in a 5-minute section. And I was so mad because she was so right. And so then that added the music, which just made more work. But the thing that the music can do is your brain is programmed to cue into audio. Like you don't even realize you're doing it. Your brain just does it because it's instinct. You're auditory sensitive. And so the track is playing, and all of a sudden you go into like a dark area, and then you put like a soft drone in, like in the background, and that subtle change like changes the way you're listening to the sound effects of the blaster fire or the rain falling, because you cue in that deep note that's just droning. Something bad is coming. Like the back of your mind, your instinct, that primordial brain from the Oldavi Gorge in Tanzania from millions of years ago is going, watch out.
Yeah.
Something big is coming. It's going to eat us. Grab your sticks, everybody. We got to go. So taking advantage of that is really important. I would say for each episode, to write the episode, just writing the script, is about 6 hours, maybe give or take 6 hours to write it. Then the rewrites probably about an hour on top of that. But the production for each episode is probably 12 hours, easy. Because you've got to go through. And the thing that people don't understand about sound effects is when you're putting like a blaster fire, like let's just say you find a sound effect for a blaster going off. Poof. We're really nerding out here, and I'm sorry if I'm getting too deep into this.
No, keep going. I like the deep dive.
So when you've got a blaster sound effect, it goes, poof, that's fine. That's cool. But that's so neutral. When I'm listening to it, I don't want neutral sound. I want perspective on everything. So when it's the main character talking and he's saying, blaster fire hit behind me, poof, we have the blaster sound effect. But then we have to change the shape of the sound. So we have to make it sound louder as it gets closer. Then what happens? Does it hit something behind you? Okay. What is it hitting? Is it hitting wood? Well, it's hitting a tree. So now we have to make sure that we have the sound effect of the blaster hitting and impacting something. It's hardwood. So we'll find like the sound effect of something hard. So sound hard impact. But then we need something also soft to give that notation of it digging into the wood. So we have blaster, hard impact, soft impact. But then pieces of wood blast off of the side of the tree. So we'll find the sound effect for some slight rubble, a few little tickles of like rubble, like, you know, falling in behind it. So you got the blaster, hard, soft, and then 2 or 3 like. So one sound, blaster fire hitting the tree beside me, is 5 sounds layered all together, plus the background ambiance, plus the music that's going on, plus the narration. So you're dealing with all those tracks. And I got an email from somebody, I just wish that you could get these out like weekly. It's like, so do I. 100% I agree. But I have a job to pay for my home and my children that I want to spend time with, and my wife that I also need to spend time with. So this happens after work is done, the kids are in bed, and my wife and I have hung out for a bit, and then she usually goes to bed at around like 10:30, and then I'm like, well, off to the old audio studio. And then I go into my like office at home and plug in my headphones and just start tinkering away on Adobe Audition on it for a while. So it can be intensive, but I think the proof is in the pudding. I think it sounds way better than what people expect when they actually listen to it. It sounds pretty pro because I'm using some pro effort when I make it.
No, it definitely comes across. And I know, especially nowadays with video games and, 8K, 4K televisions, we're pretty visual as a
Yeah.
society. But when I'm listening to the episodes, the sound gives you a picture. You're getting an auditory picture of that world, of that environment, or that moment of the
Yeah.
narrative. And I think it lends to so much more as opposed to just having the voice.
Did you watch that? It's a series on Netflix, High Score, the video game documentary
No, I
series
don't
they
think I've
did.
had a chance to watch that one yet.
There's a great line in it, and it's this Japanese video game maker. I forget who it is that said it. He goes, "Audio is confirmation," and he goes, "When you watch a video game and there's no sound, there's no confirmation about what's happening. You don't know when he gets the coin. You don't know when he makes the jump or when they land. Audio confirms everything. When you're watching it, you're waiting for that audio." And there's also my very first day in broadcasting school in the 90s, my radio teacher, he said, good audio is visual. If you're a good broadcaster, when you're on air, I can close my eyes and visualize everything that you're saying. I can hear it in my mind. And so I keep those two lines in my head when I'm making mud, 100%.
And when you think about sound in movies, it was
Yeah.
really Lucas with THX that really leveled up everything.
Yeah.
When you think about it.
Sound design, I've said this in the podcast too. Like I didn't realize how massive it affects everything, and I really am. I'm dragging myself over the coals to make this product as good as I can make it. Like I think the story is really good. I really love the story in Mud that I'm telling, and I feel that it's a very human story, and it's doing things that I have never seen Star Wars do before. But making sure that the production is as good as I can make it lends a lot of credence to the story, because let's be honest, it's just, when you get down to it, it's just fan fiction. It's just another piece of fan fiction. And that's not me trying to diminish people that write fan fiction. That's me trying to rally against the people that dump on fan fiction. Like, I want to create something that is a professional caliber production. Like, you see there's so many amazing fan films about Star Wars out there on the internet. I haven't seen anything that is like Mud in terms of being like an industry standard production from an audio perspective. Like, I've listened to those radio plays from Marvel, like the Wolverine radio play, and they're good. Like, this isn't me dumping on them, but I really feel like what makes them good is that they've got these massive casts of people that of professional voice actors that are renowned, and then they've got like writers from Marvel, and then they've got like a pro podcast production team behind it. Mud is me and 20 other people that aren't getting any money out of it. None of us are getting paid. We're doing all of this because we love the property so much. And I think that what we've got is just as good, if not better, than anything that you're going to see Marvel and Glint teaming up to create themselves. We are easily on that level. And I know that sounds like a cocky thing to say, but I believe it. I listen to it side by side, and I've seen the audio files. So I can say that, like, the caliber of production we're putting in terms of like like we're running a multi-track of 15 layers of sound constantly, and I am nerding out with the audio aspects of this right now, and I feel bad. But even if you don't understand what any of that means, listen to it with your eyes closed, with no sound going on in the background. Like if you're on the streetcar and you're listening on your headphones, listen to it there, then listen to it in a silent room and pick up on all the things that you didn't even hear. Like there's so much going on all the time. Episodes 5 and 6, I feel like I really came into my own with the production aspects. And like there's a scene with a character is sort of like learning about the galaxy. He's walking through a crowded street,
Right.
and he's seeing alien races that he's never even seen before. He doesn't even know what they are. But in the background, you can hear them talking. You can hear alien languages talking. You can hear like food being taken off of a pan, like they're sizzling. There's shuttles flying overhead. There's people walking around beside him. There's idle conversation. There's laughter. It's all there, man. It's all happening all at the same time.
No, definitely. It definitely is. And the thing that I like about it is that your attention to detail is almost putting it right in the Star Wars universe. So if I didn't know that this wasn't a Lucas Disney production, I would say, hey, this could fit in. And you know, you want to see what happens because the story's great as well too. Like it's all those things that make you a Star Wars fan.
So we talked about this before we started doing the actual interview. You mentioned the minutia.
Yeah.
When he says he's firing off, he goes through his kit. He talks about his kit, like his loadout, the weapons he carries, the makes of all of the rifles. When they're in a firefight, he says, that's this type of rifle. That's an E22. That's a Republic issue E22. The sound of that rifle is the actual E22 sound effect. That's the official E22 sound effect.
Wow.
And I went through and I sourced the audio for every weapon that they use, that they mentioned. That's their sound. And even like with the RPS-6 rocket launcher, there is no official RPS-6 rocket launcher sound effect. So I had to jumble a few layers of sounds together to make it sound like a futuristic rocket launcher. But that's the only one that I really played with. There's also, this is going to come into play later on, but they start dealing with I think it's an MH8 mortar launcher, which is a weapon that appeared a few times in the Clone Wars series. They start using mortars because of the nature of the conflict on Cestin 4 changes. That's all I will say.
All right.
And so that I had to modify and make my own sound effect for it, because once again, there was no official sound effect that I could find for that. But everything else, I've gone on to the fan forums on YouTube, and I will always give massive shout outs to the fan forums on Star Wars about how supportive and enthusiastic they are about what's being done and propping each other up. And if you like message like, hey, do you have a sound effect like this but a little bit cleaner, they'll be like, I don't, but I found it over here. It's probably going to be around there. So a big thank you to all those nerds helping other nerds nerd out. It means a lot.
Yeah, no worries. And I want to talk about your cast, because without the cast,
no,
it's just, you know, just like you're just a straight narration. So
yeah,
how did you assemble your team? How did you pick who you wanted for each character? Give us some background.
The diversity is a big word that gets tossed around. And I was very adamant from the get-go that my cast was going to be 50-50 male and female. And I was also adamant that my cast was going to be massively inclusive, and more than half would be people of color. That was non-negotiable. And so that's my main characters. There are times, however, when simply because of need, I've had people that I know down the hallway that are white that have access to a microphone, because like in the radio station, like I just filler audio, I've had to go there. But all the main characters right now, it's 2/3 are people of color, 1/3 are white. and it's 50-50 male and female. It's actually more female than male. I think it's like 55% male, because we've had 30 people that have been involved. And from the get-go, that was like what I wanted to do, because I feel like it's really important, because I think Star Wars is for everybody. But I've never mentioned the race of any of the characters that are on there, and that was because I read an article. It was on IO9. I think it was by Charlie Jane Anders years ago, where they talked about the importance of being able to identify with anybody as a character. And so I want anybody to be able to identify with anybody. You know what I mean? So that was the way I went into it. And from there, it was who had the best reads got the best parts. That's really how it came down. So and some characters I didn't intend to be very big, but the people that sent the audio back were just phenomenal. I'm like, well, I'd be an idiot not to include you more, so I will. And then there were some cases where there was a character that was fated to die that ended up dying, and I was like, oh, they were so good. I wish I hadn't given them that character. But the first person that I reached out to was Marilla Wax. She is a British voice actress, and she's been in countless video games. She's wrapped up in NDAs, so she never admits what roles she's had, but she's been in a bunch of the Assassin's Creed games. Right. So she's in there. And then Sean Hatton was my next go-to. Sean, phenomenal guy. Reviews on the Run, Electric Playground, Vintage Tech Hunters. Like, Sean's an awesome dude. And he's also a musician. So he's has a microphone. These are the things that matter to me. Like, legitimately, I need good sound. And then I think I went to Mike Walsh, who voices Corporal Husto, and Mike's a massive Star Wars fan, and he's been an artist on a bunch of Star Wars comics for Marvel, so I wanted him involved. And from there, it was just like a trickle process of finding people, and my buddy Tej voices Chorus, who's like Jesper Chorus, who's sort of like a warlord in the character. He runs a town with an iron fist, but the people of that town love him because before he came in, there was slavers that were like raiding the villages around there. But once Jesper came in with his exceedingly brutal tactics in dealing with them, everything got fine, and he started building hospitals and schools for everybody. So they love him. And Jesper is voiced by my buddy Tej. And Tej, as an actor, has introduced me to a whole bunch of other actors who all have access to microphones. And once that happened, a lot of my main roles got filled up very quickly. And then what I did, when anybody, like, I posted stuff on Reddit, and Reddit is another story. Like, don't get me started on it. Like this. I will. This is an aside for one moment.
Okay, go.
So I tried to get onto a Star Wars subreddit, and I posted that I was working on this thing, and immediately got taken down. And it's like, you can't just come on here and promote your own thing. And it's like, do you not go on the Star Wars subreddit? It's all people just promoting their own things. It's just like a "Are you cool enough" club. So whatever, done with that. So I'm a big Imgurian. I go on Imgur, which is like the image server for Reddit anyways. But going on Imgur, I actually got hooked up with like 3 other people that have done voices for the show. One of them has a Scottish accent, because I said I'm looking for people with accents. And one of these people is like, I'm a huge Star Wars fan. I've got military experience. I love what you're doing because it sounds like you understand how the military works. And my dad is a lifer in the military, and he actually would rip apart my scripts. But that wouldn't happen. That's not how that works. So he actually helped me put all that stuff together. And so Imgur was very welcoming in terms of like propagating content and hooking me up with potential voice actors and characters on the show. So that was the overall process. But Act 1 is going to change a lot of things. The end of Act 1 is going to mean Act 2 will be very different, and there will be some characters that were in Act 1 will no longer be in the second act for various reasons. And some characters will be new in the second act. So once again, we've got to go back to the drawing board.
Right, right. And for the upcoming episodes, what can you tease without
Um,
being too spoilery?
so I kind of gave a little bit of a tease when I said the nature of the conflict will change. At the at, at the there's things that happen, okay? There's things that happen in the very beginning
Hmm.
that have not been resolved,
Right.
and they will be resolved. All of those little I'm a big thing. I hate when shows throw details in and
Mm.
then they don't do anything with them. So there's a big thing at the very end of the second episode that people were kind of like, why did that happen? And then you didn't go back and touch it. I'm going to. And at the very end of the sixth episode, you kind of get a taste that I think we're going to actually get some resolution on that. You do. The road to
Okay.
resolution starts in episode 7. And like when you talk about layered sound, I spent a lot of time crafting the sound for what would it be like if you were inside a lardy with the force drive missile launchers on the roof going off and the front turrets going off while you're swooping over a target, laying down fire with explosions going off all underneath. So
Hmm.
things are happening,
All right.
and it's gonna it's I it's good. It's good. I'm really excited. I'm Next Tuesday is when episode 7 drops, and that's great. And then episode 5, once again, is very different. Episode 5, is oh, it's like Predator. I can say that. And
Awesome.
then 6, there's dude, I don't want to give it away, but I'm so stoked about it. Like,
So
I'm
that just means
yeah,
people have to be there on
yeah,
Tuesday
yeah.
to join
So
the ride.
so 7 drops on Tuesday, and then every other week, we're dropping a new episode right until the end of the year.
Awesome.
And I'm really pumped for Star Wars fans to hear it, and for anybody, even if you're not a Star Wars fan, you could know nothing about Star Wars, and it won't leave you out, because I'm very adamant about explaining things as I go, reintroducing the topic as I move along.
Now, you're wearing a lot of hats in this one:
Yeah,
director, writer, actor.
yeah,
And if you have followed you before, your comic book writing is a lot of sci-fi. What is it
yeah.
about sci-fi and Star Wars that fuels your muse?
Because I think Star Wars can be different things to different people. I think that's what I like about it the most. It can be so many different things to so many different people, and there's so many different types of stories you can tell in that environment. Sci-fi is, I always feel, the best venue for self-examination,
Mm.
and societal examination, and taking a look at the world that we live in. And you can really hyper analyze everything that's going on in the world today. And you you can't get accused of being well, I guess for Star Wars you can get accused of being inaccurate. But that's what I love about it so much. And Star Wars, I think, for so many of us, it was the first thing that we ever got to see. Like, when you're a little kid growing up, you wanted to have a lightsaber. You thought it was so rad to have a laser sword, or if you didn't want to be a Jedi, you could be a pilot, flying through space. It was funny. Last night, I was tucking in my oldest, and he goes, Dad, we actually watched The Flight of the Navigator last night,
Okay.
the Disney movie. I don't know if you've ever seen that.
No, I
It's
haven't.
not nearly as good as I remember it being, but we watched it, and we're laying in bed. I'm tucking him in. He goes, Dad, I just feel like I'm meant for so many important things. I shouldn't be in school doing math. I should be in space flying a spaceship. And I'm like, I get it. Believe me, buddy, I understand.
Right.
Uh, but math is important. So if you don't do math, you're not going to get to fly a spaceship. It's just that simple. But I think that it gives you an opportunity to, like, imagine and wonder. And I think Star Wars is more space fantasy than sci-fi. And I think
Mm.
If I'm being honest. Like, I love sci-fi, but I love space fantasy more because it's less technical and it's
Right.
more fun and imaginative. And there's some things actually in episode 8 that I do with there's an Inquisitor character on the
Right.
show, voiced by my buddy Tony, who is another radio person, but she works in Jamaica.
Mm.
So like I've got voices coming in from all over the world for this thing. But she voices the Inquisitor, and she gave me this fantastic, sinister read, because I don't think we get a taste of it in Rogue One where Darth Vader comes down the hall. You get a sense of the horror, of dealing with a Sith Lord that is powered by rage and fury. But the Inquisitors are Padawans that were broken by the dark side of the Force. So they're not just powerful Force users. They're also broken mentally. Like
Mm-hmm.
there's no switch. Like they're barely able to contain themselves. And you sort of deal with the aftermath of what happens. It's like Jet Li in that movie Unleashed, when they take the
Right.
collar off. What happens then? You're going to find out. And it's, to me, Star Wars has the ability to create amazing horror scapes, and they've never done it.
Yeah.
We jump in with both feet. That's my tease. That's my tease.
And you bring up a great point, because like people think of Star Wars as a almost like a vehicle for kids. But
Yeah.
your world is very adult, including some of the
Yeah.
language and
Yeah.
the scenarios and what happens to people. What was behind your decision to take it to that next level?
Well, initially there was no foul language. We had them saying like blast, nerf herder, things like that. But when I played it for my wife, she was like, now. And then I played her with the foul language. She goes, this sounds better.
Right.
So I left the foul language in. And also, have you ever spent any time with soldiers in a barracks? Because everyone's swearing.
It's pretty rough.
It's like,
yeah.
it's wild. Like if you watch Generation Kill,
Mm-hmm.
which is a fantastic but very offensive series from HBO about the Second Gulf War. And what's amazing is that there's actually one of the characters, Rudy Reyes, who is like, they all call him Fruity Rudy in the show. That's the real guy. Like, that's the actual Rudy Reyes, like from the series, who's a recon Marine that the rest of them make fun of, but they're also all terrified of.
Right.
Like the book is really good because they get way more into the details about all these guys do is try and beat the shit out of each other. That's all they do. Like when they're not in combat, they're always fighting or trying to get the drop on each other. But it's about like, we're all beating the crap out of each other, but don't you dare walk in here and try and start with any of us. Because even the guys we don't like, we're a unit, we're a family, we're together. And that is one of the things I'm trying to create with Mud. And so to create that and have it be believable, they also have to have that sibling mentality of constantly getting on each other's nerves, because that's the way it is. But it's that, like, my father joined the military in 1966, and he was in the military his entire life. Like, he is a lifer in the military. And he said that one of the things about being in the barracks together and being on edge and nitpicking at each other is you build a dependence on one another and a reliance on one another. And just as much as you're irritated and annoyed with yourselves and everybody around you, there's nobody that you're going to go to before them, because they're in it with you. Like, and if you guys can't solve it, you go to your sergeant, because your sergeant, though they're brutal to you, they'll look after you. And there's a line in the first episode where they talk about how their lieutenant, who is a cloner,
Right.
They're terrified of him. They hate him. But when he's around, there's the assurance that nobody will make problems for them because he's there. Like, he'll protect them. Like, they're his. They belong to him, and nobody can touch them. You know what I mean?
No, totally. Totally. I completely understand. Yeah. And, I wish you the best of luck on the second half of Mud 79. I'm really, really enjoying it. I think Star Wars fans would get a real kick out of it. And I think that even though it's a little bit on the adult side, it's something that older Star Wars fans, and then maybe, not quite the kid level, but ones who are a little bit older, can all enjoy and relate to, and we'll take different things out of it.
Yeah, I wanted it to be a much more human Star Wars,
Mm-hmm.
like in the way that Rogue One was. Rogue One, really, when I think about Star Wars influences, it was the biggest influence, I think, from a Star Wars canon perspective. Like, just the mood of it. Like, the very first time you meet Diego Luna, and he's like, "Don't worry, we'll be okay." The guy turns around and shoots him in the back. Like, I'm like, "Oh my God." Like, but that's what you would have to be. Like, if you're going to fight against the Empire, that's the type of mentality and the conviction you're going to have to win, man.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like survival at all costs.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Well, Fred, I want to thank you for visiting in the asylum and sharing Mud 79 with us. I had a great time talking things Star Wars, and I wish you the best of luck moving forward. Where can people find you in the meantime?
If you just go to Omni and look for Mud 79, you'll find it. If you go to my Twitter feed at fearless_Fred, I'm posting about it constantly. I'm actually going to be posting a pinned tweet later on this week with the next episode. So if anybody wants to go check that out there. Also on my Instagram, if you go to my Instagram, actually, at fearless_Fred, in my Insta stories, I give a lot of teasers. Like, while I'm producing it, I'll post Insta stories of the scenes in the process, and it won't just be audio. You'll see the actual multi-track of all the audio pieces that play together and how they all work with the effects and everything. So if you've ever been wanting to do something like this on your own with not just Star Wars, but any property, I'm very, very open about what I'm doing and how I'm doing it, because I hate people that get territorial about the idea of creation. I think that everybody should be working together and helping each other out so we can all create amazing stories to share with each other.
No, fantastic. And I recommend that everyone go in and check it out. It's a great listen, a great experience.
Thank you, buddy.
All right. Well, we'll be in contact again, and I look forward to chatting with you some more about this.
Totally, man. Awesome. And
All
if you want to do any sound effects for me, like combat yells, grunts, deaths, or anything, just let me know. I'll shoot you a list of lines that I always get people to do for me.
It'd be an honor to be part of the Star Wars universe, for sure.
Awesome,
Definitely.
buddy. You have a good one, dude.
All right, you too. Take care of yourself.
Goodbye.
Thanks for listening, everyone. And once again, a special thank you to Fearless Fred. We look forward to your comments, so reach out to us on Facebook and at Comix Asylum on Instagram and Twitter.